Right. So another totally rewarding chat, and we have Jen Hassrick, who is the vice president at Siegel Consulting. And I'm going with Jen, and as we spoke about prior, and I've known you for a while, it's Jen or Jennifer. I'm going to make it Jen so it's easy on for me, not Jenny.
Correct.
Correct. Not Jenny. Yeah, not Jenny. So that's who we have on. It'll be very exciting. We're going to talk about pay equity and transparency. But to start with, just so people get a bit of your background, and so that I don't screw it up, give me the elevator pitch. However many stories you need on your background, because actually your background is very interesting on how you got here. It's not the usual right out of school, being consultants and work your way up thing.
Yes, I kind of think of my career in eras. I'm going to steal that from Taylor Swift. Having a family of young teenage daughters, I think that's appropriate. I started in consulting, my first job out of school, in compensation, moved to the tech space. After that for a while, had an era of business ownership operations. We're running 3 businesses at the same time. Was a little crazy. And then I found my way back to compensation. So most recently, right now I'm at Siegel. Right before that, I was at Korn Ferry, and really focused on broad-based compensation and pay equity. So as I always tell people, I build and test systems. So that's what I love to do. And I'm excited to have this conversation today.
All right. That's good. And to prove you're a human, because we can't do the check if you're a robot box. So what do you do for fun outside of work? Although you said you have, Swifties, that could be.
Yes, I have Swifties. We're a pretty athletic family. So active. So I bike a lot. My ski, I like winter. I'm in Wisconsin. So I spend a lot of time outside in the winter, snowshoeing and whatnot. And one of my daughters is a ski jumper, on the national team. So I spend time in random places around the world watching her compete when I have the chance.
Random's a little harsh. I mean, Lake Placid's awesome. So it's not that random. The Olympics were there twice.
I could be in Estonia today if I really wanted to go watch her. So there are random places.
Actually, Tallinn's one of my favorite places. So
really?
Yeah. Have you been?
Mm-mm.
Oh, you have to go. It's like, this is my side, and I'm not sponsored in any way, shape, or form by, the Tallinn Visitors Bureau, but it literally is like a medieval town and parts of it that they've kept really whole. It's kind of a you have to go once thing out there. Really cool, super nice. So anyway, that's my pitch for the day.
Well, maybe I'll make myself there next time she shows up there.
All right, so we're going to start something new with you, and I figured we'd pick on you. So just to learn more, the speed round to get things warmed up. All right?
All right, so I'm bad at game shows.
Okay, well, there's no wrong answers here. And
okay, good.
Being the first one, I didn't think of it until now. There's no buzzer. So there's also that. So tea or coffee?
Tea.
Okay, see, that's not a wrong answer. That's tea.
I do both. That's why I'm like, which one do I want to
pick? Best number of compensation cycles a company can do in a year?
2.
The most important question that's going to be asked today is next: creamy or crunchy peanut butter?
Creamy.
All right, game on. Weird side note, I was recently in Denver speaking at World at Work, and I always ask y'all when I'm speaking the audience that were more crunchy than creamy, which is the first time all year I've done that. I'm like, I don't know what's going on in Denver, but
that's interesting.
Yeah, everywhere else it's generally like 2/3, 3/4 creamy. So anyway, very, very interesting. It's usually very polarizing. Number of equity reviews in a year a company should do once they're going?
Once they're going? 1.
Okay. And favorite sports team of any level?
Oh, well, I'll go to my childhood favorite, the 49ers.
Okay, that's fair. I added that one, and I thought there are wrong answers there.
Well, there's a little side story to it. So I'm in Wisconsin. I was born in Chicago. My dad was a Bears fan. My grandfather, who was born in Wisconsin, was a Packers fan. And I chose that to be a rebel. So I had to pick somebody else. So I picked the Jerry Rice,
Oh, yeah, that era. Yeah, I grew up in Chicago. I'm a Bears fan, which, your dad and I can woe since 80. Basically, we went from great in 86 to bad forever. So,
Exactly.
um,
Exactly.
so the way I start off all the pay equity and transparency conversations we had is just getting in your words, define for people pay transparency and pay equity.
So I'll start with pay equity. I mean, simple terms, right? Similar pay for similar work, but considering experience and other factors, I think that just there has to be a holistic view of pay within the organization and what's influencing it. So that's how I take a look at equity. On the transparency side, I think it's really about how are you clear with how pay is determined, and I think transparency has a kind of a spectrum. You can, as long as you're clear and there's clear guidelines, I think that's the beginning. You can go as far as to the minutia of this is exactly what the ranges or whatnot, which is still open to interpretation. So I think within an organization, having some insight to how you get to a result is important.
I hadn't planned on talking about it, but when you mentioned that, it's interesting with transparency because most of the legal issues that are out there is it 7 states, 6, 7 currently, 4 coming, plus I think New Jersey's on the ballot, now, or depending on this comes out, has been on the ballot. Most of those are about job postings and the external transparency. But your definition right now was really, as I tell people, there's internal and external. Yours was really on the internal transparency side.
Well, because the external mandates are impacting the internal, and that's where the pressure is, right? So, I mean, I think yes, they have to. There are postings, right? And you have to know what to post, and you have to have your story straight to be able to post accurately, because you're going to cause problems internal if it's not correct.
Correct, right. So if you're paying me, $10, and probably you rightly so $15, then you have to be able to explain to me when I run down the hall and go, what gives?
So. Yeah. I mean, on the external side, though, I think that there still is a spectrum. The laws are all very unclear and they're inconsistent. And so it's very difficult to even put your arms around what transparency is, right? I think that the ranges are helpful, but we also know that not everyone reports in the same way. And so they become very unhelpful very quickly and causes problems on the end.
Correct. Yeah, I've joked that a lot of companies put it out there because they have to. I think some will start using it as a marketing tool. So I'll put total cash up, I'll put total comp, I'll do something to basically make myself look better, because obviously I'm going to apply to the jobs that have a higher pay range for that. And then explain that internally that's total cash or something like, total comp,
right.
But the communication becomes an issue. But I think it is interesting that companies will, they always find a way to exploit something for their benefit. And because it's not really clear on what's included, what it is, what is account, it's going to leave a lot of room for companies to kind of do some different things.
Yeah, and you can't really get away from it anymore either. I mean, Colorado was the first, right? And people avoided posting jobs in Colorado. Well, now you have 23 states, right, that have something. And so it's like, it's
no,
not.
And if you're in one state, you can't put like, don't apply. And if you're in Colorado, you can't do that. So, so let's go. So you've been working with a bunch of companies, working through the pay equity piece. So I just want to start with, what is the best process? So framework out for an imaginary company, the best process, best practice on how you tackle pay equity out of the gate.
First, have legal be part of your conversations, engage with legal. I think that's very, I think that oftentimes I find that organizations underestimate what could happen with a study. And so having external counsel is very good. Internal, if you don't want to engage outside.
Do you have a preference there for companies? Because that was literally what I just wrote down was like, do you suggest they have external to kind of provide one degree of separation?
Because the power, like the first time any organization does it, it's good to have the third party help. Right. And do that so that you make sure there's no bias even embedded in the processes. Eventually, you can do some of it internal with a third party check every so often. But I personally, I would go, if you can, do with an external counsel, only because the conversations, which is one of the best practices that we always like to do, is have those stakeholder conversations with leadership. Very hard for them to be open and honest if you have the legal team internal sitting there. Yep. And it's just uncomfortable. People become guarded. So if possible, I would say the external is the best, way to go. And having somebody that understands your organization and understands pay equity. I think that's the other piece. I have been on some projects where the council wasn't as familiar with pay equity. So not only were we teaching them how this works, and then they're thinking through all the legal risks, we're also working with the teams, the project teams. So I best case scenario is external with some knowledge and experience in this type of work.
No, that's fair. And I usually frame it as there's a lot more precedence around confidentiality for a third party hired counsel as opposed to internal being an employee versus counsel. And so that you don't know what's under the covers the first time piece has got a little bit of extra layer of protection.
And I think internal still should be part of the project team, but I think the biggest one is those stakeholder conversations, which is the next step. So you get started, you engage your counsel, you get your team. Team typically, obviously a CHRO usually is the champion of this work, but then having their team being able, whoever's under there that understands the data and be able to get the data and be able to explain some of it, but keeping it a small, tight team, because the more people you have, it gets a little risky, right? Because it's the knowledge, of the results that can, if anything gets out, that's an issue. So, get your project team, keep it tight. And then usually, above the CHRO, oftentimes, then we start having conversations with the CFO. Your chief, your teams at the top is usually where you want to have conversation. And then if there's divisions within an organization, the leaders of those groups, because what the intention of those conversations are is to be able to build trust and be able to kind of start teaching them what you should be thinking about, because they may not realize some of the practices that are there are, causing issues, or maybe they're not, but at least there's an awareness. So that's the first part, having those conversations, and then start getting the data. And, the data, usually it's, a snapshot of current census. Take a look at that data, create the model based on the unique parts of the organization. I've never done a study that's exactly the same, because every organization is different. They might have divisions, they might have regions, they might have high minimum wage you have to control for. You might have IT is often, different market. They might have a comp philosophy, but this is a little sidecar over here that we have to control for. And then you do, standard descriptive statistics, just to see where your balances in the organization, where there are gaps, and then the regression analysis. Then you do all that, and then you run it a couple times, because you always find something that was missed in conversations to explain. Say, well, wait, we noticed this. Why is this? Oh, we forgot to mention this, this other thing. So then the model has to keep, change several times. And then you get to your final results, and you're really looking at kind of two key things: are there cohorts that are statistically significant? Are there gaps that are large within particular cohort? And then you look at the individuals, and within those cohorts and without, and see what is that distribution. Where's your legal risk, which is about 2 standard deviations below the mean. And you start vetting that. And then you determine what that cost would be, how much you want to move them, which I know we'll talk more about. And then the last piece is whether or not to communicate it. And I think that's the hardest piece of this. Because, you can, and when you want to do any kind of increases, or, that's a whole nother conversation and strategy that comes at the end. And we can go into it now, or we can kind of dig into it.
I have a question. Like the obvious one for me always is budget, and when you tackle that, because pay equity. Maybe you've seen it. I have not. No one ever lowers someone's compensation to bring everyone back. It's not really a thing.
Nope.
The only real solve to pay, if there is a pay equity, is money.
Mhm.
Do you tackle that up front when you get the C-suite in there at the beginning, or do you kind of wait until you kind of see, how much it's going to be?
You usually wait to see how much it's going to be. It is very difficult to predict what's going to happen.
Do you tackle the issue that, hey, by doing this project, like there's potentially money involved?
Right. Well, we do. I mean, on a high level, I mean, they know it could cost something, and they just don't know how much. And I've seen some organizations shift money from one puck. They've already had something earmarked, so they're like, well, we'll tap into that if we need to, or we're going to shift this budget, or but they know it's going to cost some money, and I think that is oftentimes why people don't even get started, because they know it's going to cost something.
Yeah, I think jokingly, I've told people in the U.S. still, not for long, I think the best thing you can do is obviously, do an equity project, figure out your problem and fix it. I sadly think the second best option, still currently for the next couple of years, is the ostrich method.
Very much so.
Not knowing, because the worst thing that can happen is someone finds out you did one, you found out there were issues, and you just didn't tackle it. So the ostrich method in the U.S., which is why the EU, I think, is kind of nice. It's kind of like said, well, you can keep your head in the sand for 2 years, but no more. So you got to start dealing with it.
Yeah, and truthfully, I mean, there's so many organizations that don't even have a compensation philosophy or structure or system, and so the ostrich method is also almost necessary because they don't have a way to even measure jobs. I mean, they don't have a defensible mechanism to measure, even where how much a job should be paid. And so I think that that is very much a theme. They're afraid to do it, or really they can't do it.
So you mentioned the snapshot, but I'm curious, why do you not pull the historical data in? Or when you mean snapshot, do you mean all the historical you can grab, but at this particular date?
Yeah, typically, I mean, so you can, if you want to look historically, you can look at, you could do talent flow analysis where individuals are coming in and out. That's more of opportunity equity type of mindset. Yeah. But when we do a pay equity study, it's a point in time of what current pay is, because we don't know what happened a year ago. We don't know what happened 2 years ago. Hard to tie the pay policies and practices and leadership making decisions. So we often do it at that point in time. The only thing that we do look, if we have to, a little bit back, is say the bonuses or any other. And then we do look at what merit was and whatnot. That could possibly explain some of the data. Yeah. But typically this is what the current pay is. This is what the current job is. And typically we focus on base for that study. If we can, it depends on the cycle of bonuses. It doesn't often fit. Everybody's on different ones. And so it's hard a lot of times to do more of an historical view for the equity piece.
I guess there's a couple of things of interest in there. I guess for me, the length of service piece, if you're working against that as an item, right, as one of your variants, that to me, I'd want the history, because theoretically is that, how's that curve bending as someone's been in there? Because in theory, it's kind of point of diminishing returns in a range, right? Mm-hmm. But that's not always the case as they get to know somebody better, and you have these, biases that show up. And so does the curve kind of inflect up the other way? So for me, that's always a really interesting one. I think the other piece is the bonus, because bias to me, there's a lot more bias in the bonus, because as a good friend of ours now, and I did check actually to make sure it was his quote, so I wasn't misquoting, but Tom McMullen at Korn Ferry, it's his saying. So unbridled management discretion is the enemy of pay equity. And so if you give them guidance, and there's only so much you can do with 3.5 points, in base pay, but you let them run rampant in bonus, then that's where they'll run rampant, right?
Yep.
And then it's a 1 year total cash really exercise. I view pay equity. I mean, you can talk about long term incentives and that down the road,
Mm-hmm.
but I view an initial one, personally, as
Mm-hmm.
a 1 year total cash exercise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, I think first you measure the gap, but I think you have to look at those other pieces too. And not all organizations have that data. I think that's the other piece. How their data is collected or reported is different. And I've been on projects where they have multiple cycles of bonuses, right? And there's no rationale either.
And I struggle with that though, because 1 year total cash, it's cash. And so you can fundamentally talk about the methodology or how it was paid, or was it truly
Mhm.
formulaic, or was it granted, but it's a payroll number. It's a legit payroll number. Now, not
Yeah.
only that system might not be the system of record where it is and it gets harder to get, but
Right.
where there's a will on that one, I think there's a
Mhm.
way. I think when you talk about grants and the timing and the vesting periods and
Mhm.
whatever, that gets crazy about
Yes.
how you value, how you value that. That
Right.
to me is where it gets squishy. But this whole we can't find what was paid last year for incentives. That's
Sometimes the timing has been weird. I've seen
yeah,
that, or they skipped, and then so some people got it, some people didn't. So then it
yeah.
could be underreporting. I've seen some of that. I mean, if we can, we do the total cash, but it's not always something you can do. And we always have a wish list. Like, this is everything we wish you could give us, and we can't always get it because they may not collect it. They might be between. And one thing I've seen too is, you mentioned time and job. I've seen ERP changes
Yeah.
not being able to truly measure the time and job, because when they move to the new
No
ERP,
one's more than 5 years, because that's when we upgraded the system, right? Yeah,
yep. So
yeah,
they're
yeah.
like, oh, well, you're going to notice this 2018 number. Well, that's the year we did the ERP. So you could be there for 30 years and the system doesn't know that.
Correct.
And sometimes we've been able to go back, but not always. And that will skew results, but that's the data that you have.
No, and I think, to be fair, in today's environment, I think the flip side to that is, let's get a process going. Let's go through this, right? And so if it's only tenable to work on base pay,
Mhm.
I guess in some cohorts, it depends how leveraged they are, right? That becomes a
Mhm.
thing or not a thing. But for the bulk of people, I think
Yep.
that's a solid place to start and get a really good process. And then you can be like, okay, we know the process. We just need more
Mhm.
information
Right.
to pull in over time. So then the cohorts, we didn't kind of talk about that at the beginning. How do you help create cohorts? Because I think there's some, having been out at some of the World at Work stuff that's out there, people think it's same pay for same job,
Mhm.
and that job is like the same exact title.
Mhm.
So when you create a cohort, how do you define your cohorts, and how do you put people into cohorts through the process?
I mean, it depends on the organization and how they're organized, truthfully. It comes down to if there is a different compensation philosophy or approach within a subset of the organization. A great example is a retailer. They might have distribution, they might have shared services, and they might have the retail locations. Those all have different, they might have some similar jobs in there, but not necessarily. I mean, they may have same size jobs, but the jobs are, they're going to be approached differently based on the market and who's running those. I mean, I saw a distribution company that had different mindsets on within their divisions, and everyone ran their pay their own way. So, I think that it really depends on the organization. But it's that kind of the line in the sand is pay approached a different way. Do they have the same system, the approach? Are they looking at the same market data? Do they have the same rules? And that's the first part of that. Another example, I was just thinking credit unions, financial institutions. They are going to have that shared services. They might have a different, branch type of work is different. And then they might have, I think I know I did one. I think we had 3 different ones because the way they again approached that isn't necessarily geography. You can correct for geography within those as well, but it's more about that high level function.
Do you think, though, that's going to be pressed on the other side with kind of the external view of are those jobs different or not? So the example being kind of, a UK box retailer
Mhm.
who basically says we approach the pay philosophy for a stock person inside of a store um, different than we approach someone at the warehouse, which
Mm,
recently legally has been found to be like, you can't do that. They're the
mhm,
legit same job. Just
mhm,
one's, in a warehouse, one's in the store. Do you
mhm.
think that's going to be part of what you have to start taking into consideration?
Yeah.
Because the fact that I have a different pay philosophy in this location and that location, but the job's the same, is
Mhm.
that going to be a feasible reason to not pay equitably?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it's, I think, against those, the rules of the road are going to need to change to adapt to ensure equity. I mean, I think the reality is we have biases and equity in our market data, right? I mean, that's just the market in itself. And so I think pay transparency is forcing better rules, better mindsets towards how you approach pay. And absolutely. I think there is, though, one caveat to that is that market demand will probably trump that. So you might have that similar job, but there might be a scarcity in a particular area or in a particular industry and or in even a location. And that's going to
But that's going to
that
be an interesting. I think that's where it's going to get really interesting, right? Because
yeah.
you know how is that a legally defensible position to take on why you
Hmm.
have numbers that are different
Hmm.
as you go. Um, and as you mentioned, the market data is interesting to me because that's an external labor market function, and pay
Hmm.
equity is an internal labor market function. I mean, it doesn't
Hmm.
matter if you pay at the 25th or the 75th percentile as a company. It's
Hmm.
are you paying, it doesn't matter how you pay a market. It just are
Right.
you consistently good or bad payer? At the end of the day, you can be a bad payer as a company. You just have to be consistently crappy to everybody. That's
Right.
yeah.
Right. Yeah.
That's kind of the
Yeah.
goal, right? Um, okay, so let's assume we've gone through this process now. You talked about communications, and then let's talk about remediation. So
Hmm.
we have a problem. I guess the
Hmm.
old Houston, we have a problem issue. Now how do you see companies best tackling this? Let's assume they do have a problem. They went through through the process and there are some issues that have to be tackled.
Hmm.
What do you think of when you come to timing for remediation, how to
Hmm.
communicate that, and then kind of we'll talk about long-term remediation.
Yeah, I mean, the best thing that I would say that I see most organizations do, especially if they have a larger problem, is don't have a town hall about it. First of all, I mean, but embed it within. I mean, one, make sure that you know exactly what you're going to do, and if it's going to be, and then you can't fix everything overnight, and so is it going to take a little while? So understand what your path is before you even say anything about it. In terms of timing, I mean, the best case is to do it through your merit cycle and not have that big shining star on it. I also have seen it being, part of the conversation and part of your process that we do merit increases, and then they have another cycle for equity increases. That again brings some light to it, and so it really, having your story and understanding exactly what you're going to say is critical if you're going to not embed it within that other process.
But would
Those
you
annual
recommend
adjustments.
probably a best case would be to, either do a pay equity set aside or pay
Mhm.
equity addition, depending how you budget,
Mhm.
alongside the merit. So we do
Yep.
merit, we'd run that through the regular cycle, and then HR business partner somebody, consultants if we have to,
Yep.
goes through and helps you allocate that pay equity accordingly as part of the
Yes.
same cycle. So it's a little
Yep.
more seamless and not called out.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the best case scenario to be able to do that. And it really depends on the timing of your study and your timing of your merit cycle, right? As well. You don't have to do it immediately. Let's say you did your study in June and your cycle's not till March. You don't have to do it immediately, but plan for doing exactly what you just said and knowing that there's that carve out.
And as they go forward with remediation, I think one of the things I've, be curious your take. Well, one, how do you operationalize this? So let me, before I
Mhm.
talk about the how you look at remediation ongoing, like how do you see companies moving from, we hired a consultant, we had a third party
Mhm.
attorney, we went through this big project, and like it's a lot like software development coming from dev. We
Mhm.
launched, and now what, right? Like
Yeah.
you've got this ongoing maintenance thing that has to happen. How do you see people setting themselves up for success best in that case?
I mean, I think keeping it part of the conversation and embedding it within your process is the best thing to do, because it's not going to go away. If you put it on the shelf for 5 years, you come back, you're going to have something, right? I mean, so just making it less painful, so it's just part of the conversation in one of the reviews that you do. You can do a lighter type of review in off cycles, and then maybe do a bigger one every few years, just to make sure that you're making progress. But really, the goal is to narrow gaps, and the goal is to remove any significance, which is indicating bias. So that's what the goal is ultimately. Your goal is not zero. It's going to be very, that's data, right? You're always going to have some outliers, but that's really, from an operational, embedding it in processes, and having a little bit of a carve out every year. I think the other piece is getting in front of it. And, this is the hiring piece. And we know the pandemic caused a lot of compression, a lot of issues, and we're going to be unraveling from that for a while, as well. But getting ahead of those type of processes too is the other way. It's not just about doing
my soapbox is the analytics, both at the time that you figure out the problem, but in the remediation. And I say that because, I think much like comp planning and equity, because it's part of that process, is people do it and then they check the box and they leave, and actually did our thesis work, but also helping build that thesis of how we solve. And so the very extreme example I'll use sometimes is like retail. Like if you realize you have an issue in retail, it kind of will go away in 2 years if you hire right. If you look at certain roles, right? We can turn, really good box store turns over 40% a year, right? So, to your point, it's like the remediation comes in two forms. And it's like, which roles are turning at a place at which if I actually just become a good payer consistently and, do the right thing for everybody coming in, a lot of that will take care of itself, which ironically is not the big, hard, heavy hit that you'd see on the P&L at once through the piece, right? So they get in front of that. Other roles, you might be like, hey, turnover is 2%. Like, we got to do it. Like, you can't pretend it's going to magically solve itself in this period of time. And so those analytics of what happened, did people stay? Did they go after the piece? Like, did that all shake out? The other piece of that I think is going to be interesting is, there's only so much money.
Well, you're exactly right. And you can't, you can't fix it overnight. And, it takes time. And one of the biggest constraints is budget. There's only so much money available. And so, I think, prioritizing which areas that you want to touch, obviously those that are single outliers, that are in that legal risk zone, pay attention to those. But again, you can move them over a couple of years and be mindful of decisions with those.
But I also think like equity tackled in a vacuum is more expensive than not. And so if you look at a whole thing and say, people who are over 120% of comp ratio or whatever don't leave, statistically, I mean, humans are not all statistically predictable, but in general, right? And so you create a little bit more of a matrix that basically skews some money around so that you pay that philosophy better. You can pull some money into the set aside out of that same budget with the same effect that you were hoping to versus, the creamy peanut butter spread as you spread. So I think making sure that equity is looked at holistically across the whole comp plan is actually all those analytics pulled in together can help them find the money versus just this swath of additional money.
Right. Yeah. I think that's a great point because I think, you mentioned the ostrich method and that is one of the reasons, they know it's going to cost money. They might know they're going to probably find something. They know it's going to cost them money and they don't have any. And so how are we going to do this? And I think I like your idea, like looking in the matrix form of where can we pull to be able to shift, because really that's
you gotta know, like in that, and this is where it gets complex. I know it maybe sounds overwhelming, but there are certain roles in certain locations, right? Where you can say we've traditionally given 3 to 3.5% or something. This next year we might have to come back for a year while we fix this and give 2%. But we know the risk of resignation statistics show that while we'll feel bad about ourselves for not giving them the extra point, we know we can do it because nobody leaves in that position for a year. And then we'll kind of get back to business as usual once we've solved this problem. But there's also going to be roles, because you can't do it unilaterally, where you're going to be like, actually, if we go below 3%, we know historically like churn's going to go up and we're going to pay. So actually we can't pull from there. And so I think looking at it just holistically with all those analytics around it becomes the way to, help find the money, depending how bad a person you've been as a payer, as a company, in the past, you can only find so much in the couch cushions as well.
Well, and you touch on, some level of sophistication that you need to you're talking about, that if you do this, you get churn. If you do, a lot of organizations don't have that knowledge and, sophistication in their analytics. So that's, I think, an intimidating factor as well. But I would agree that, moving from one bucket to another makes a lot of sense. And you could actually turn that into a story, right? In the sense of this is what, where this year we're focusing on this, or you start putting that into your message and know that it changes because of the balance that we have.
No, I agree. So if there, what have been the top one or two hurdles that you've seen companies struggle with, obviously beyond the I don't want to know?
Yeah, I've number one is fear. I mean, I think that's, and intimidation. I mean, statistics are, pay equity goes beyond the statistics that you typically are used to, in terms of comp. So, the word regression freaks people out. I mean, they don't, multiple regression even then, so I think there's that factor, that hurdle, and they know that they can't necessarily do it. Budget paying for the project, and budget knowing that they're going to have to make some increases. And then I often see a hurdle of leadership. There's, not all, especially those making the decision, for whatever reason, any of those and others is, there's not a lot of buy-in. So a project can sit on the shelf, a potential one, for a while until there's either a change of leadership or a change of mindset that forces the decision to do, type of.
Well, I think the leverage, it's interesting because it costs money and potentially hurts. And the people it hurts the most when it costs money are the people with more leverage on the company's performance short term, because their bonus is, my base is much lower, my performance is higher, and it's less on my personal and more on the company's performance. And so, they're not there because they're dumb. They, they're doing the math in their head and they understand what's going on. So it is, I think, complex. And I don't think it's because I get beat up a little bit because I sometimes say all people. I'll go with most people today. I think most people want to be fair payers for the roles. Like, I fundamentally don't think there are people saying I just don't want to pay fairly. I think it's this problem somehow got here and I somehow either inherited it or it happened because I wasn't paying attention, but it wasn't because I wanted to be a bad payer. But I have to pay the price to fix the problem that I didn't really want to deal with one way or another.
Right. Yeah, I agree. And I would say, some of the leaders I've worked with, I mean, they understand the connection of equity and culture, right? So I've also had on the flip side some very engaged and excited and motivated, leaders that say, I want to do the right thing. I understand this is good for my culture. This is the kind of company that I want to be leading. So, there is on the flip side of that. And so I think that, you get both, right? But that's what I've seen in terms of the barriers of getting going.
So if you boil all that down and you give one piece of advice for people looking at tackling pay equity right now, what would it be?
Start the conversation. Get started somehow, right? And it doesn't mean starting with a project. It's starting to think about and have the conversation with those that are, leaders, managers and leaders, of understanding, what pay equity means and what is it? How does your organization fit into that equation? Baby steps is really what it takes.
Okay. And then the question I ask almost everybody, if you could automagically, which I'm sure is in your lexicon as a professional.
I use it all the time.
If you could automagically fix one thing in all of HR, what would it be?
Job descriptions. They're so important. They're very important because it gives everyone a path, but they are also what everybody avoids and because they're hard. They're hard to write. And if there was one way to just have that work be done and not bogged down without the stress that it creates. Because it ties into comp systems, it ties into pay equity, it ties into job leveling and architecture and career frameworks and training and everything.
But the only functional place it's truly used, which is where it goes, I think, always completely off the rails, because I agree that it's a huge thing, is it get used for talent acquisition. And talent acquisition spins it to get the best candidate possible for that specific role. And then that all of a sudden becomes the updated job description for somebody who's not doing that. And so it like the weeding or cultivating or whatever weeding of the job description garden and maintaining that, I think, is where I would argue that's like pay equity. Actually, if you do the process once, that's fine. It's better than doing it 0 times, but it goes off the rails so quick because the people who use it, their goal is not for why comp and pay equity wants to use that job description. If anything, it makes it worse because they have multiple job descriptions for people doing the same role.
Yep. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that, I was just at a conference this past week and, someone was asking, about how do you keep it going? I'm like, it's just, you can't build a system, even if it's a comp system, and not maintain it. It's a garden, and job descriptions are another garden that feeds, many others. And I think that, if you maintain it, it's fine, but that's where it gets, it just causes so many problems. And then people choose to ignore it. I've seen job descriptions that are 10, 15, 20 years old, and we all know that work has changed. And that's usually the, that's why I say there's the pain, like people avoid it. People like, it's a tough one.
Well, I appreciate it. For those that are watching, listening, you can get Jen Hassrick at Siegel. She's easy to find. We'll put her information out there. Be looking at the Olympics in, another couple of winters, right? For ski jumping, which I still think, having been up to Lake Placid and gone up to the top of that thing, to not take the stairs down and decide to just roll on down and jump, have at it. That is just trouble waiting to happen. This has been great. Always great catching up with you. Again, if people have questions, easy to find, and we will catch up with everyone next time.
Awesome. Thanks, Sean.